A racist CEO publicly mocked the elderly black woman in worn-out clothes, calling her a charity case. He didn't know he was taunting a retired military intelligence colonel who had the power to dismantle his entire empire. The air in the executive boardroom of the Thorne Pinnacle Medical Center was as cold and sterile as its surgical suites. Sunlight, filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows, did nothing to warm the chillingly quiet tension that gripped the room. This wasn't a place of healing, it was an arena of power, and a hearing was underway. Seated quietly to the side, away from the main mahogany table, was Colonel Evelyn Reed. At 65, her presence was one of profound stillness. She wore a simple, neatly pressed but faded dress, and her graying hair was pulled back in a modest bun. Her hands, weathered by time and discipline, rested calmly in her lap. To any casual observer, she was an unassuming grandmother, perhaps out of her depth in this world of corporate sharks and million-dollar lawsuits. She was here to offer silent support to the family of a fellow veteran, a young soldier who had died under this hospital's questionable care, his family's claim now being systematically dismantled by a team of slick lawyers. Presiding over this dismissal was Richard Thorne, the hospital's CEO. A man whose tailored suit was as sharp as his reptilian smile, Thorne radiated an unassailable arrogance. He saw Evelyn the moment she was pointed out as a friend of the family. His eyes swept over her worn clothes and dark skin, and a smirk of pure disdain formed on his lips. Leaning toward his chief counsel, Thorne muttered, his voice a stage whisper designed to carry. "Who let the charity case in? I thought we screened for people who could actually afford our coffee." A few sycophantic chuckles rippled through his side of the table. Evelyn's expression remained unchanged, her gaze steady, which seemed to irritate Thorne even more. He decided to address her directly, his tone dripping with condescending sweetness. "Ma'am," he began, leaning forward. "I appreciate you making the trip, but this is a rather complex discussion. Are you sure you'll be able to follow along? We wouldn't want you to feel lost." Then, turning to his board members, he added with a wink, "Perhaps we should have someone fetch her a glass of water. Or maybe a blanket. This room can get chilly for the elderly." The insult was multi-layered, a cruel cocktail of racism, sexism, ageism, and classism. He saw a poor, old, black woman, and in his world, that meant she was invisible, powerless, and an object for his amusement. He expected a flustered response, perhaps tears or an indignant outburst, something to confirm his superiority. Instead, Evelyn simply met his gaze. Her eyes, the color of dark, still water, held no fear and no anger. They held only a deep, unnerving calm. She gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of acknowledgement, not submission. And then she waited. She waited, a soldier in perfect control, as the man who had just humiliated her unknowingly sealed his own fate. That boardroom was merely the final stage. The real war had been waged for months in the shadows, from a place Richard Thorne could never imagine. The quiet, unassuming woman he had just insulted was retired U.S. Army Colonel Evelyn Eve Reed. She wasn't just a decorated officer, she was a legend in the world of military intelligence, one of the architects of modern psychological and data-driven operations. For 35 years, she had moved through a world of secrets, dismantling enemy networks not with bombs, but with meticulous, irrefutable truth. Now, she was a senior field investigator for the Department of Veterans Affairs, Office of Inspector General, tasked with protecting the soldiers she once led. Her presence in that room was the culmination of Operation Nightingale, a deep-cover investigation into a pattern of systemic medical fraud targeting veterans at elite private hospitals. Thorne Pinnacle was her primary target. For 10 months, Eve and her team had been building a fortress of evidence. Their command center was a nondescript office building miles away, its walls covered in timelines, financial charts, and photos connecting a web of deceit. Her team was a hand-picked unit of specialists. There was Specialist Marcus, a young data forensics genius who could trace a single dollar through 1,000 shell corporations. There was Dr. Anya Sharma, a former military surgeon who could spot falsified medical reports from a mile away. And there was Ben Carter, a retired military lawyer from the JAG Corps who understood the legal labyrinth they were navigating. He took the bait, Colonel, Marcus said, looking up from his monitor as Eve walked into the command center later that day. He played the audio from the boardroom, captured by a device smaller than a button on her dress. Thorne's voice, filled with derision, echoed through the room. Eve listened, her face impassive. His arrogance has always been his primary vulnerability. It makes him sloppy. It's more than sloppy, ma'am, Dr. Sharma added, pointing to a document on the screen. It's a pattern. We've cross-referenced the records of every veteran patient treated here in the last 3 years. They were systematically overbilled for cheaper, substandard medications while the hospital billed the VA for premium treatments. The profit margin is staggering. And Thorne is at the center of it, Ben Carter confirmed, circling a name on a legal document. The fraudulent billing protocols were authorized under his direct signature. He's been funneling the profits through a network of shell companies registered to his family members. The investigation had started with a single whisper, a nurse at Thorne Pinnacle, herself a veteran, who noticed inconsistencies and risked her career to report them. From there, Eve and her team had meticulously pieced together the puzzle. They had financial records, internal memos, and now, a key piece of evidence, the sworn testimony of that whistleblower nurse, who had agreed to testify under federal protection. Thorne, meanwhile, felt untouchable. He knew there was a VA audit happening, a routine nuisance, he thought. He never once connected it to the quiet old woman in his boardroom. In a call with his CFO, also recorded by Eve's team, he laughed about the investigation. Let the government bureaucrats have their fun. They'll find nothing. These veterans are just looking for a handout anyway. Half of them are probably faking their illnesses. Especially that old woman's friend. We did him a favor. That statement, more than any financial crime, solidified Eve's resolve. Thorne didn't just steal money, he stole the dignity of the men and women who had sacrificed everything. He saw them not as heroes, but as marks. As Eve stood before her team, the final pieces of the operation falling into place, she knew the next time she saw Richard Thorne, it would not be as a silent observer. It would be as the storm he never saw coming. When the hearing reconvened 2 days later, the atmosphere in the boardroom had shifted from tense to electric. Richard Thorne sat at the head of the table, a portrait of smug satisfaction. He believed he was moments away from crushing the family's claim and making an example of them. He shot a dismissive glance toward Evelyn, who sat in the exact same spot, her posture as straight and unyielding as a flagpole. If there are no further arguments, Thorne began, a predatory smile playing on his lips, I believe we can conclude this matter. The board finds no evidence of malpractice. Excuse me, Mr. Thorne. The voice, though quiet, cut through the room with the precision of a scalpel. It was Evelyn. She stood up slowly, every eye in the room turning to her. I believe you are mistaken, she continued, her voice gaining a strength that seemed to reverberate in the silent room. There is further evidence to present. Thorne's smile faltered, replaced by a flash of annoyance. And who are you to present evidence? You are not a party to this claim. You have no standing here. On the contrary, Evelyn replied, her calm demeanor beginning to unnerve him. I have every standing. She walked to the head of the table and placed a slim leather portfolio in front of her. From it, she produced a single, official-looking ID card and slid it across the polished wood toward Thorne. His eyes widened as he read the words, Colonel Evelyn Reed, Senior Investigator, Office of the Inspector General, U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. The smirks on the faces of Thorne's lawyers vanished, replaced by pale, slack-jawed disbelief. For the past 10 months, Mr. Thorne, Evelyn announced, her voice now commanding the absolute attention of everyone present, your hospital has been the subject of a federal investigation into systemic fraud, criminal negligence, and civil rights violations against United States veterans. I am leading that investigation. Thorne's face went from white to ashen. This is, This is preposterous. An outrage. The outrage, sir, Evelyn countered, her voice dropping to an icy calm, is what has been happening within these walls under your leadership. She nodded to an aide at the door, who dimmed the lights and turned on the large presentation screen behind Thorne. What followed was a systematic, brutal demolition of his empire. First, the audio. Thorne's own voice filled the room, laughing as he called veterans, handouts, and describing his plan to use substandard drugs. Then came his voice from just 2 days prior, mocking Evelyn, calling her a charity case and a grandma. The board members shifted uncomfortably, refusing to meet his desperate, pleading eyes. Next, the financials. Complex charts, simplified by Marcus for devastating clarity, appeared on the screen. They showed millions of dollars being diverted from veteran care funds directly into shell companies owned by Thorne's wife and brother. The money trail was a digital highway leading straight to his front door. Finally, the human cost. A video deposition played. It was the whistleblower nurse, her face obscured but her voice clear and steady, detailing how she was ordered by Thorne's chief of medicine to alter the records of the very soldier whose family sat in that room, to cover up a fatal medication error. They let him die to save a few $1,000s, she said, her voice breaking. Thorne lunged to his feet. Lies. All of it. This is a setup. She's a bitter, vindictive. You were saying, Mr. Thorne. Evelyn's voice was steel. She turned to him, her eyes burning with a righteous fire that had been forged in decades of service and discipline. You saw a quiet, old, black woman and assumed I was nothing. You were so blinded by your own prejudice that you never once considered that I might be the very person holding you accountable. You judged my dress, my skin, my age, and my gender, but you never thought to judge my character. That is your undoing. The boardroom was silent, the weight of the truth absolute and suffocating. Thorne stood there, trembling, his world collapsing in real time, exposed and utterly defeated by the woman he had dismissed as nobody. The boardroom doors swung open with a decisive thud. 2 federal agents, a man and a woman, stepped inside. Their movements were economical and professional, their presence instantly shifting the room's dynamic from a corporate hearing to a crime scene. They walked directly toward Richard Thorne. He stumbled backward, his face a mask of disbelief and terror. He looked wildly around the room, from his now silent lawyers to the stunned board members, his eyes begging for an ally. He found none. His gaze finally landed on Evelyn, a torrent of venom in his eyes. You bitch, he hissed, the last dregs of his authority curdling into a pathetic insult. You did this to me. Evelyn stood her ground, her expression unreadable. No, Mr. Thorne. You did this to yourself. You built a house of cards on the backs of heroes. All I did was pull the first one. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed in the silent room, a sound more final than any gavel. As the agents escorted a now sobbing Thorne toward the door, he was no longer a CEO, no longer a titan of industry. He was just a criminal, stripped of his power and his pride, his expensive suit now looking like a cheap costume. He was led out past the veteran's family, who watched with solemn, tear-filled eyes, finally witnessing a justice they had been denied for so long. Evelyn walked over to the soldier's mother, an elderly woman who had sat through the proceedings with quiet dignity. She gently placed a hand on her shoulder. I'm sorry it took so long, Evelyn said softly. The woman looked up, her eyes conveying a gratitude deeper than words. You didn't just give my son a voice, Colonel, she whispered. You gave him an honor guard. The news of Thorne's arrest exploded like a shockwave. Within hours, the story was leading every national news outlet. The hospital's board of directors went into an emergency session, immediately suspending every executive implicated in the scheme. Federal auditors descended upon the hospital, a clear sign that the institution itself was now under a microscope. The impact rippled outwards. Whistleblowers from 2 other private hospitals in different states, emboldened by the news, came forward with similar stories of fraud against veterans. Operation Nightingale, once a covert investigation, had become a nationwide reckoning. For Evelyn, the days that followed were a whirlwind of official debriefings and legal preparations. She wasn't celebrated with a parade. Her victory was quiet, confined to the sterile hallways of federal buildings. But her purpose was clear. This was never about the downfall of one man. It was about rebuilding a system that had failed its most deserving citizens. She knew that true change wasn't just about punishing the guilty, it was about creating structures of accountability to protect the vulnerable. The battle was won, but for Colonel Evelyn Reed, the mission was just beginning. In the months that followed, the system began to correct itself, slowly but irrevocably. Richard Thorne was convicted on multiple federal charges and sentenced to a prison term that ensured he would never again hold a position of power. The Thorne Pinnacle Medical Center was restructured under federal oversight, its name changed, its mission rededicated to ethical patient care. The most significant change, however, was born from the ashes of the scandal. Galvanized by the public outcry, Congress passed a new piece of legislation, the Veterans Dignity in Healthcare Act, colloquially known as Eve's Law. It established stringent new oversight for private hospitals receiving VA funding and created a fast-tracked, independent investigative body to handle claims of veteran mistreatment. Evelyn, true to her nature, avoided the political spotlight. She turned down a presidential appointment and refused all media requests. Instead, she took a new role, one she designed herself, heading a small, agile task force within the VA dedicated to proactive field investigations, ensuring that a crisis like the one at Thorne Pinnacle would never happen again. Her new office was modest, overlooking a small city park. On her desk, next to stacks of case files, sat a single, framed photograph. It wasn't of a president or a general. It was a picture of her younger self in army fatigues, standing shoulder to shoulder with a group of young soldiers, men and women of all races, full of hope and courage. One evening, she held an old, worn challenge coin in her palm, its weight familiar and comforting. Her victory wasn't in Thorne's imprisonment, but in the knowledge that the soldiers in that photograph, and all those who came after, would be a little safer, their dignity a little more secure. It wasn't about revenge. It was, as it had always been, about duty. Now, to you who is listening, have you ever been judged by your cover? Have you ever had your voice silenced because someone in power decided you were not worth hearing? This story is a reminder that dignity is not given, it is inherent. And sometimes, the quietest person in the room is the one with the most powerful truth. If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear your voice. And please, always comment with respect. For more tales of justice and empowerment, subscribe, like, and share. Let's ensure these stories are never silenced.